All right. Okay, I think we should be live on Facebook and on Crowdcast. Okay, I think we're live. Hey everyone, welcome. Thanks for joining me in this session. And I just want to also say happy Valentine's Day to everyone. Hope you're having a nice Valentine's Day. And also happy Chinese New Year, happy Lunar New Year. I wish you all for the new year, longevity, great health, happy, healthy family, bliss, delight, success, prosperity in all your endeavors, and everything that you desire. So happy New Year, and that's my New Year's wish for you. Okay, so let's get rolling. I'll start by saying I'm honored to be with you here in this time of sensitivity and uncertainty. And I look forward to sharing this time with you here in our shared sacred space together today. Here, our 48th session of Sacred Space. Let me just check the Facebook to make sure we're rolling. Okay. And the things we're going to do together in our shared sacred space time today is the format will be a little bit different. We will go ahead and set sacred space. But Gowrie is actually off this week. So she's asked me to prepare one of the sort of non-fairy tale talks. Before we did all these fairy tale talks months and months ago, I would do talks on like the Tao Te Ching and the trickster archetype and all these things. And we may still go and mix in with some of those. But we've been on this multi-month tear of doing fairy tale related talks, but she's off, and I don't want to do any fairy tales without her. So I'm going to do a different topic today. The topic for today will be the sacred and profane in conceptions of time. The sacred and profane in conceptions of time. I'll explain a bit of what I mean by that when we get into it. Then we'll have a bit of an exercise that is related to that. I don't know that we technically call it an embodiment exercise this time around, but it is the exercise that is kind of appended to my notes when I look them up on Sacred Space, Sacred and Profane in Conceptions of Time. So we'll do that. And then we'll close Sacred Space. I think this one will probably be a little bit shorter. There's a lot to say on time, but I'm just looking over sort of all the notes I have on the archetype of time. I think it's a little much it's probably 2 or 3 talks. So I'll just do the sort of intro talk, let that kind of digest a little bit, and then see later on if there's appetite for more. Okay. All right. So let me just check my feeds. Okay. So we'll go ahead and start by setting sacred space together in our group here. So what we would like to do here in our time together is to create a space which is devoid of fear, threat, and control. In order for us to open to higher guidance from within our own selves, not from the outside, from within our own selves, however we choose to define that. So it could be my intuition, random, brilliant flashes of intellectual insight, intuitive insight. Could be a muse that you feel guided by, or one of the deities of your religion, the religion that you follow. However you decide to open yourself up to that higher guidance from within. And to do that, we want to be in, while we do that, a safe sanctuary space where we can all relax and surrender with no danger or threat. So that in addition, while we're doing that, so that we can partake of the nourishment, the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment that pretty much can only be had, those specific kinds of emotional and spiritual nourishment that can only be had from being in sacred space together here as a group. In an opening sacred space today, I will propose, as I do every week, that we all follow the 4 principles of Presidian sacred space. Number 1 is confidentiality. Standard Vegas rules: what happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. Now here, of course, we're not in person, we're online. The stream is publicly available. The replay, for the most part, will be publicly available. And so online, the way we do confidentiality is by anonymization. So if you would like to be anonymous, you don't have to be anonymous. If you would like to be anonymous while you chat and ask questions, and you don't have to chat or ask questions either. But in the event you would like to be anonymous, the way you would do that here is you would come into the Crowdcast stream, go into the edit my profile feature, and then just change your username to Harry Potter or Mickey Mouse or whatever, and then continue participating anonymously. So that's number 1. Number 2 is that in sacred space, we try to refrain and abstain from anything that could be felt on the other side, or even within you, ideally, as being a threat or an act of control, or poking fear, provoking fear. So what we say is that there's no threat or controlling in sacred space, no fixing, no tough love. So even if it's well-intentioned, we don't go in and try and sort of get under the hood and try and fix things. Not because there's anything wrong with that. And again, as we always say, we're not saying the profane is wrong or bad. The profane is the profane. It's necessary. It's like light and dark. I mean, hopefully we're not saying the light or the dark is bad. It's just 2 sides of a coin. And we embrace the coin in its entirety, right? So the profane's not bad. The profane's just profane. There are certain things you can only get done in the profane, and there are certain things you can only get done in the sacred. So here, for this hour or 2 every week, every Sunday, we would like to marinate in sacred space to do the things you can only get done in sacred space. So here, part of that is no threat, no controlling, no fixing, no tough love. After sacred space, go crazy, as per usual, right? But here we would like to hold space for each other, to be however we actually are, right? To hold space for each other mutually, to be afraid, to be anxious, to be a mess, to be incompetent, right? Or to be competent, to be happy, to be relaxed and okay. Maybe genuinely, or maybe like I'm relaxed and okay, but I'm in denial about what's going on in my life or in the world. And even if you're doing that, it's like, we're okay with that. We just hold space for you as you are, without trying to go in and make adjustments or style you or fix you or improve you. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3, as a corollary, is that there is no commerce in sacred space. So nothing may be sold. I can't sell you anything. Gary can't sell you anything. Please don't sell things to each other in the chat, right? We are here for your energy, not for the things you bring. Right? We are here for what you are, not for what you do or provide. And we talk in the original sacred space sort of talks where we explain the difference between sacred and profane, why no commerce is important, and that extends to recommendations as well. So even if I recommend somebody's book to say, oh yeah, this is a great thing for this condition or issue, even that we would like to refrain from doing that in sacred space. Because even though I'm not, benefiting financially, it doesn't matter. When I recommend something in response to something you've said, out of pure good intention, even that recommendation is a kind of well-meaning threat, right? Because then you feel, well, gosh, if I actually don't read the book because I'm just lazy or incompetent, then I won't get the healing and pain relief that this so well-intentioned friend is giving me. And we don't want to do that either, right? Afterwards, recommend anything you want. But here it's like, even that, we're not trying to sort of improve or fix or heal or help anyone. We're just sitting in sacred space for its own sake, for no good reason. And because we find delight in sitting in sacred space together, just to pull some ideas together that we've been kicking around in the last month or so. So the 4th is no expectation of participation. So as a corollary to the first 2, there's no pressure to do anything. There's no pressure to chat or not chat. to listen attentively or not listen attentively, to leave comments, to ask questions, to participate in any exercises we suggest, to sign up for email, to buy programs, to do anything. There's no expectation of any of that. There's no pressure ever to do anything because, again, the nourishment comes from the held space with no fear, threat, or control. And your presence and attention to that kind of enriches the space. That's what, like is the beauteous and delightful thing about this. The magic comes from what you are, not from what you do or provide. So whether you quote unquote participate or not, we enlarge each other and nourish each other through this kind of holding space action. Okay. So those are the 4 principles of proceeding sacred space. You can obviously do these on your own when you're in meditation or going for a long run, sitting in a hot bath. You can have these 4 principles that you hold into effect for your own sort of nurturing and nourishment. But when we do this in a group, right, all of us together tend to amplify that effect, which is why it's so delightful to do this. So anyway, this is what I propose. And if you are not okay with that, that's okay too. There's no fear, threat, or control for you to come to sacred space or stay in sacred space. But just as a heads up, we're about to cross the threshold into sacred space. So if you are not okay with that, this would be the moment you would withdraw from the group to not participate in sacred space. And we'll still catch up with you later in profane space and hang out and still be friends and allies and no worries at all, right? But for now, we will just give you a moment, everyone a moment, to pause and make your selection as to whether you would like to continue forward into sacred space together. Okay. All right. So for the rest of us, we will now move forward and cross the threshold together into sacred space. And as we come into sacred space together, I'll just remind everyone that we are now in a space where we would like to observe the 4 principles of proceeding sacred space: confidentiality / anonymization, no fear, threat, or control, no fixing, no tough love, no commerce, no recommendations, and no expectation of participation. All right, here we are. Welcome to Sacred Space, everyone. Happy Valentine's Day. Happy Lunar New Year. I hope everyone is doing well. Okay, so apparently Gary's off this week, but she's still in the chat. Nice one, Gary. Okay, so here I am on screen all alone here doing my non-fairy tale talk. Okay, so let's do this. So what I would like to do is our topic for this week is the sacred and profane in conceptions of time. So Gary's off this week and has asked me to prepare a non-fairy tale session. And this is a topic that I have been kind of promising for several months now. Frankly, it's way overdue. To make some comments on the nature of the sacred and profane when it comes to the topic of time and the archetype of time. And yes, for those of you who are paying attention, I am behind schedule and late with promising my talk on time. Ha ha. Okay, ha ha. But for a topic like this, what I'm going to try and do is keep my comments relatively short and more precise to the extent that I'm capable of doing that. And then over time, people can watch and re-watch this session to kind of absorb the points more slowly and at their own pace over time. So many of you have told me that the talk on the Tao Te Ching that I did last year, have told me that you've watched that, sort of 7, 8, 9 times to kind of pay attention to different parts and how they sort of link together. which is super awesome. It's not, I didn't intend for it to sort of be that kind of a talk. But when people have told me that, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's exactly how I have done it. You know, when I've read books by other people or watched things that other people have done, when it's really sort of dense and thick and rich, there's a lot of food value there. You go back again and again and again. So those of you who have done that with some of these talks, thank you for telling me. And I'm like trying to sort of be more mindful of that as I put some of these talks together. And it's totally how I used to do it too, and I still do it. Okay. And these topics on time, when we talk about the nature of time, it will be a little bit nuanced, and I may lose some of you. And, you know, hopefully you'll be okay with that and still come back, you know, in future weeks. I more feel like I'm just fulfilling a promise to talk about this topic, to sort of start to put in the next puzzle piece in this larger picture that we have started to fill out. So I'll just sort of try and get this on the official record of our talk series, and next week we will have Gary back finally, and we can go back to our fairy tale format, assuming that's what Gary and her muse decide to continue to do. Okay. All right, so let's get into it. The sacred and profane in time. So first, I want to just do a quick thumbnail review of what we mean by sacred and profane, right? Just to refresh as we dive into this topic. So the quick version again is the profane is a realm, profane space. What is profane space? Is a realm that is characterized by the qualities of fear, threat, and control, right? And we say there's nothing wrong with that. Like 99% of our lives in the modern secular world is profane. And not in a sort of, you know, moaning, groaning kind of thing, oh, there's nothing sacred anymore, everything's profane. But to say that the way our, you know, the sort of development path of our world has been in the modern world is that we have slowly and steadily stripped all aspects of sacred out. And in some cases with good reason. We've like thrown things out that were the carriers of sacred, but those things were too oppressive, so we scrap, you scrap those. And what we're left with is a very, very profane society where everything is fear, threat, and control. Now, we don't say that is bad necessarily, okay? Because there are things that you can do in the profane that you can't do in the sacred. So for instance, business, transactions, a contract is a memorialization, is a coded document, right? That memorializes a constellation of fear, threat, and control. So if you sign up for a subscription membership and say, you know, every Sunday I'm going to give this talk on sacred space, haha. If I miss, you know, a couple months in a row and you're still paying me, you're going to point to the contract and say, hey, I'm paying you, you didn't deliver, and I want my money back. Okay. So that's fear, threat, and control. And if you don't give me my money back, I'll sue. I'll like crucify you on like, I don't know, online reviews or whatever. So that is fear, threat, and control. But that's not bad. That's just a contract, right? Everything, the internet, everything, the video system we're communicating across right now. The fact that we pay scientists to develop vaccines, right, that will save the world. The fact that I have to pay for, you know, fuel to put in my car, right? None of these things are intrinsically bad, but the mechanism that makes them work is this mechanism of fear, threat, and control. And that is of the nature of profane space. And so there's nothing wrong with that. Now, when we talk about sacred and profane, to the extent that your life is 99% sacred and 1%, 99% profane and 1% sacred, you may, according to your own taste and preferences, want to dial that back to 70-30, 50-50, 99-1, right? 99% sacred, 1% profane. But that's up to you. It's like salty and sweet, right? It's like salty and sweet. It's like we're not saying salty is bad. We're not saying sweet is bad. But if it's 99% even sweet and 1% salty, if you're cool with that, carry on, no action needed. But if you're like, whoa, this is way too like cloyingly sweet or whatever, I want to dial it back, then you dial it back. You do whatever you want. So profane is on the one side, and the other side is sacred. And the way we describe sacred is, my preferred definition is that sacred space is a space which is devoid of fear, threat, and control. Now, basically, that works out to the sacred being a space of surrender, love, and nurturing. Because nature abhors a vacuum. So if you suck out all fear, threat, and control and there's a vacuum, the thing that will come back in when there's a leak in the container is the only other thing that exists, right? So if it's not fear, it's love. If it's not threat, it's nurturing. If it's not control, it's surrender, right? These are like sort of kind of paired, dual, binary pairs, okay? And so I personally prefer to describe it as the space that is devoid of fear, threat, or control, precisely because we're so used to fear, threat, or control that when we take it away, then we're like, oh, this feels different. And we avoid the wrinkle of saying, oh, it's a space of surrender, love, and nurturing, because our habit is fear, threat, and control, right? We're like 99% in the world. That's like, we're like fish in water. That's all we see. So anything you give me that's positive, that's surrender, love, and nurturing, our tendency will be to say, okay, so in this space, you better be in surrender or else. You better love and nurture or else, right? And that is like the reflex of fear, threat, and control that sneaks back in. And we're like, yeah, that sacred space tasted awful. What happened? It was still too sweet. And it's like, that's why. So anyway, it's easier in practice because we find ourselves in an initial position of 99% profane to just say the space devoid of fear, threat, or control. Because then the contradiction is more obvious when you start doing it. Okay, so anyway, that's our quick thumbnail on what is the meaning of sacred and profane. Past talks in the replay series, we'll go into much more detail, examples, et cetera, et cetera. So that's sacred and profane. And here we want to inquire as to what is the nature of time when you look at it through the lens of the sacred and you look at it through the lens of the profane. We've done this in a couple of different talks in the past. We've talked about the nature of art when you look at it as sacred and profane. We've talked about the nature of the ground of reality, right? What is the actual nature of reality? And we looked at it through the lens of sacred and profane. There have been other things that have come up. I mean, you could do this with anything, like leadership, mathematics, anything, right? Any archetype you can look at through the lens of sacred and profane. But time is a little bit interesting because it's come up in a couple of other talks. And so, and actually in the chat before we dive in, there are two talks that I will reference. One is the talk on the Tao Te Ching, which I'll put in the Crowdcast chat. And Gary, if you're still there, if you could just repost that to the Facebook side. That would be super helpful. And, no rush. Or anyone could do that. I'm like deputizing advisees as we go. So there's two talks I put there that I'll reference. But the thumbnail here is that time is, as we think of in the Western world, is an arrow, right? In more sort of traditional indigenous societies, it's more of a circle. And we won't really get into that today, but in our profane sort of world sense of time, time is past, present, future. We see it as an arrow, okay? And the basic quick thumbnail here is that when you look at time as defined by past, present, future, the past and future are what we refer to as profane, and the present is sacred. Okay, past and future are profane, and the present is sacred. Now, relying on the comments and disclaimers I just made, we're not saying that the past and future are bad. We're saying they're profane, and we're not saying the profane is bad. The profane is just profane. Right. So when you live in a world where you're 99% profane, you live in a world where in your inner being, you spend 99% of your time in either the past or the future, and 1% of your time in the present. Okay. So just a little bit more detail here. Why is the past and future? Why are the past and future profane? And we'll take each of them separately. So the past, when we sort of live in the past, when we think about the past, you think about good things in the past, you think about bad things in the past, okay, is typically a realm of things that, well, I mean, they're not current, right? The present is just the present. And when we're sitting here and forget about thinking about bad things, right? Let's just think about like good things. Oh, remember that like hot fudge ice cream sundae that I had, like, last year when we were vacationing in Dublin, and we had that amazing basket of fish and chips and we were all sitting around and so great. Even a lovely memory of the past like that, you think of it, and our typical first reaction, right, is something in the realm of fear, threat, and control. In other words, I will think of those fish and chips and I'll think, oh, would that I were in Dublin again, oh, in COVID, I can't travel. I miss my friends in Ireland. And when am I going to get back there again? When can I travel again? When am I going to get my vaccine? And I hope, I can travel and still have a schedule where I'm like going to all these places and still hit Dublin. Wouldn't it be a shame if I didn't get back to Dublin for another year or two? That would be awful, right? So blah, blah, blah. You don't have to sort of incline into this sort of threat. I better get back to Dublin or else, my goodness, will I ever have fish and chips or a Guinness, right, as good as the ones I had in Dublin? I mean, with Guinness, the answer is no. Guinness tastes different in Ireland. I don't know why exactly, but it does. But past, when you think of the past, right, even though I'm sitting right here in the present, I'm sitting like, in Northern California, right, in February of 2021, and my mind is like in the past. Naturally, you have some sense of threat, regret, fear, anxiety of things, of either good things not happening again or bad things happening again, right? You could always think back to, oh, this like car crash we were in and this happened, oh my gosh, it was so awful. And gosh, it makes me remember to, like, when I get in my car, like really drive carefully, really. And in reality, I'm not in a car, I'm just sitting here, right? So that is how you think about, sort of the past being this. And there are sort of potential ways of like threading the needle and of kind of being in the past, but sort of still in sacred. And it's just kind of these things where it's like, even if you can prove, hey, I did it for this like 1 nanosecond, it's like, okay, congratulations, but still it's sort of like, we're trying to give a sense of the overall quality of the nature of the past as we experience it day to day. I guess what I'm saying is, what I'm trying to give you is not a strict intellectual theoretical framework, but just to kind of describe what our everyday experience with the past and future are. When we're in the past, fear, threat, and control crop up. Similarly, when we think about the future, the exact same thing happens, just in a mirrored form. Okay, because in reality, we have no idea what will happen in the future, right? That's why we call it the future. But we take what we know, the past, and we mirror project it onto the future. So all the fear, threat, and control we have in the past goes into the future. In the car example just now, I may live my whole life and never get into another car accident or fender bender. Knock on wood, I hope that does happen. Okay, but I don't actually know. And so when I think about getting into a car, if I've had issues in the past, I'm going to sort of be extra careful when I'm driving my car, right? When the light's green, I'm going to cross and I'm still going to look both ways, right, to see if, people are not running the red light, okay? And that is a quality of fear, threat, and control into the future, right? I don't know what's going to happen, but I am guarded with this feeling of fear, threat, and control. Like I'm putting my seatbelt on is I feel under threat. That's why I put my seatbelt on, right? And again, that's profane, And that's okay. It's like when you get on a car, please put your seatbelt on. Please feel the threat and put your seatbelt on. We're not saying the profane is bad. The profane is just the profane. Okay. But basically, everything in the future is based on things you've learned from the past. Like if, I were someone who had never been in a car, I'd go in and I just sit in this little like funny looking room where everything's pointed in one direction. And someone would be like, put this seatbelt over you. And I'd be like, why? Right. And because I don't have that past, sitting in a car, right, I am actually in a state in the present when I'm sitting in that car in that different state. I'm in a state of the sacred where I'm sitting in this car and I feel no fear, threat, or control. Right, I'm this like complete blank slate. I have no idea where we are. I have no idea what the context of this is. And so there, you end up being in this like sacred space. Said another way, sometimes, ignorance is bliss. It's better if you just don't know, right? All the bad things that could happen. But anyway, when we think about the future then, and when we in real time put ourselves into the future, what is the future? Oh, my schedules, my calendar, who I'm meeting next week, how I have to prepare, or else, right? I have a client meeting, I better prepare, or else. Retirement accounts. Do I exit the market? Do I get back into the market now? What do I do? How do I manage my portfolio allocation in the middle of this pandemic, right? If you're a farmer planting crops, do I plant early? Do I plant late? Is it time? Is frost going to hit? Should I like harvest early and take my chances, right? Project plans for work. All of these things, when we think about the future, are about fear, threat, and control. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay. But it's this reflex of fear, threat, and control, and reality, as we know, whatever actually happens, happens. Right? You have this entire sort of work travel schedule laid out for, in my case, like for all of 2020. And the pandemic hit, the skies closed, all the planes are grounded, and all the things that I was fearing, fear, threat, and controlling about, all went out the window. Okay. So past and future then typically have the quality, I'll just say have the quality of fear, threat, and control. Okay. And so past and future incline toward the profane, right? The ambient aroma when you are mentally, sort of in the past and future. The ambient aroma, the feeling is of the profane. Okay. So that's past and future. What about the present? Right? In the present, there is no past. There is no future. There is only now. Right? If I stay firmly in the now, there is no threat, almost by like definition, categorically by definition, because in the now, there is no future. And if there is no future, there is no fear, because all fear is about the future. Right? If someone grabs me and like holds, points a knife at my face, actually in the present, I'm fine. It's only when I think about what could happen in the next 30 seconds that I start to have fear. Okay. In reality, right, the present is eternal. The present is eternal. Right? We experience it as happening from moment to moment because we have this Western kind of, feeling of time as an arrow, right? Which has everything to do with the archetypes of religion, of our, sort of Judeo-Christian tradition. Our archetype of time is centered around the arrow sort of archetype of time, not a circle, and also not just nothing, right? So when you do these comparative studies of like, traditional kind of native religions around the world, Aboriginal, indigenous religions around the world, in many of them, they don't have words for the past or the future, right? They'll have words for, raining time, right? The rainy season, or the dry time, or the hunting time, right? But hunting time from 100 years ago is no different from hunting time today, right? The same myths, archetypes are sort of acted out again and again. And we are basically no different. We just have this funny feature of like our archetypes point us forward in the direction and point us away from even actually looking at the archetypes that are underneath. Okay. So I'm going to say a couple more things here and not really go into as much explanation because it would branch off in too many directions. But just to leave them here as almost like reference points. So when we talk about the present moment, the quality of the present moment is not that there is one present moment after another. The present moment kind of transcends the arrow. Right? You have the present whether you think of it as an arrow or whether you think of it as a circle. And there are other archetypes too, but this present moment is the thing that endures, regardless of the archetype you use for quote unquote time. Even if you take away the archetype of time, the present moment is still here. The present moment transcends the shape and structure of the time archetype we impose on it. Okay. What that means is that the present moment is not subject to the rules of the arrow thing of time, where it's like one after another. There's like a past present moment and a future present moment. That's not a thing. The present moment is just the present moment. So they're not strung like beads one after another. There's only one present moment, and it is now. And this present moment is not everlasting, because everlasting presumes time, right? It lasts for all time. The present moment is rather eternal, right? And when you say something is eternal, you're not saying it's everlasting. Those are two different things. Everlasting means in the arrow of time, it lasts for the duration of the entire arrow, even if that's forever. Everlasting, for everlasting. But when you say something is eternal, it is completely outside the flow of time, because it doesn't change, right? Even if you rewind the arrow of time 1,000,000 years back, this thing is unchanged. 1,000,000 years forward, it is unchanged. It's not lasting. It is outside the stream of time entirely. So, I mean, Catholics, to their credit, make this distinction. They say, we hope for everlasting life. But eternal life is this sort of separate thing. And then in like the Zenist Buddhist tradition, I'll just pull randomly. So like from the Japanese the Japanese Zen tradition, you have someone like Dogen, who's like this grandmaster from 500-600 years back, and he would say something like, fall does not follow summer, right? It's not a progression. There is summer, and then there is fall, right? And said another way, there is only one present moment, and it is now. Now it is summer. Now it is fall. And that sort of touches at this feeling of the present moment is not a string of beads. There is only one present moment. And the good news is it doesn't move. It's eternal. So you can always find your way back to it, right? Those of you who have done the clarity meditation workshop with me in the past, when we talk about the Bhava Chakra wheel and the center of the wheel is a proxy for the present moment. Okay. And so finally, one more thing to add here, a bit of extra credit, if you will, is that another way to sort of, locate yourself in terms of like where you are, right? Is my head in the past? Is my head in the future? or is my head in the present? Okay. Now, in reality, you're always in the present. And I'll say more about that in a minute. But one characteristic of the past and the future is that they actually require words to exist and be held in your mind. Okay. Without words, there is no past, there is no future. Okay. So, so if I say, for instance, show me, a pencil without words, you'd say, there you are. Okay. Show me matter without words. I'd be like, you're looking at it, right? Without words. But if I say, show me next week without words or signs or symbols, right? I'd be like, I'd pull out a calendar and try to show you my phone next week. And it's like, that's not next week, that's a phone, right? Oh, next week, February 22nd. February 22nd. February 22nd is not next week. That's a sound. February 22nd. February 22nd. Or I show it to you on the calendar. That's not next week. That's a squiggle on paper. February 22nd. Right? Where will you put, if I ask you to put your finger on next week, where would you put your finger? Right? And what you realize is next week does not exist. And similarly, if I say, put your finger on last week or last year. Right? Oh, remember like last March when the pandemic, we were locking down and nobody, we weren't sure if we could fly or not. And then we realized, blah, 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 all that. And it's like, okay, show me that, like put your finger on it. Where would you put your finger if I asked you to touch, right, last March? And you're like, and then you'd go back into your head and say, well, this is all a very nice theoretical exercise, but let's get back to reality, right? Well, like I can show you the video. We can talk about, economic policy going forward and whether we're going to wear masks or not. Let's get back to sort of reality. And when you say get back to reality, you say, let's go back in our minds into the past and go forward in our minds into the future. Because that's where everything is profane, where you have fear, threat, and control. There is no control in the present moment, right? There is no control. But at the same time, the past and the future, right, in this very real, felt, visceral sense, they do not exist, right? They exist in the mind. And I'm not going to say only in the mind, right? The mind is valid, the body is valid. But they do exist in the mind. And the mind is the thing that we've said before, can flit around, can go back and forth, can theoretically go into the past, theoretically go into the future. And because of that, the mind typically is the seat of the profane, is the seat of fear, threat, and control, because it can imaginatively go back and forward into the future. Okay. And in order to go back into the past and the future, you need words. Right? Without a symbolic system, you can't go into the past or the future. And arguably, in the Western sense, in the secular sense, there is no time. There is no time without words. Now, we've also said that the past and the future are the realm of the profane. Okay. So that also connects words with the realm of the profane. You don't need words in the present, right? You need words to sort of sit there and just let whatever happen. You don't need words. When you're haggling with the goat vendor out in the profanum, right, in the original example from a year ago, you need words. Right? How do I haggle over the price of the goat if I can't say, no, 30 shekels is too much. I'll give you 25, right? All of this requires words. So fear, threat, and control require words and symbolic systems. The profane requires words and symbolic systems. So that because of those physics, you can use them, you can exploit them in order to control, ironically, right? How you navigate and sort of orient yourself if you're trying to go toward the sacred, right? So said another way, if one of the ways you can sort of very quickly get into the present moment and find yourself in a sacred state is to stop using words. If you drop the use of words, then past and future fall away. You can't think of them without words or images, right? Which are also symbolic. And you very quickly drop into the present moment. You feel like a dumb animal. You're just like a dumb animal. You're just this cow sort of staring at you, chewing its cud, right? The cow is not thinking about the past or future. It's just kind of like, like what we deride as dumb animal, but there's a lot of wisdom in that, where you sit in the present moment, and that's what it feels like. It feels like you are a dumb animal, and you're not thinking about the past or future. But the trade-off is that you are also in a realm devoid of fear, threat, and control. And again, it's not that one is better than the other. It's salty and sweet. You decide what the right sort of blend is for you. Okay. To continue these comments a little bit, to round them out. So if I said, show me the past, put your finger on the past without using words, where will you put your finger? I'm like, oh, I don't know. Show me the future without words, where will you put your finger? If I say, show me, produce next week, right, from inside your blazer, right, what will you show me? I was like, nothing. Okay. Then if I say, show me now, where will you put your finger? In a very similar way, you also don't know where to put your finger. But not because it's nowhere, but because it's everywhere. Right? In order to show you now, the most honest answer is right, because everything is now. Right? If I said now is this, it's like, yeah, that's technically true that this is now, but it's not. It's not precise because everything is now. Right. So those of you who have done Bliss, right, or done the talk, I think it was the Tao Te Ching talk, where I talked about Ziran, right, the sort of Chinese Taoist sort of conception of the self, of all reality, of everything, of nature, right? To show you Ziran, I don't point to everything and anything because Ziran is everything, right? My finger goes nowhere, but for a very, very different reason. Okay, this is why going back to things like Dogen and the Japanese Zen tradition, and then the early Chinese Zen, but in Chinese it's Chen tradition, Chen Buddhist tradition. The answer to certain koans, which is these tests to see if you're like getting this, is silence. Right? Because what many of these koans or gong'an, right, in Chinese are trying to test for is, what is the level of your perception? Are you perceiving this, right? And in many instances, the most accurate way to answer that is to just be silent and sit there. But of course, word gets out that, this dunderhead just was silent and he got promoted. Right? So it's like they'll like whisper to each other, yeah, just don't say anything. And then, of course, the job of the master is to discern whether the student actually gets it, which is actually the harder challenge. It's actually, it's easier to see it within yourself than it is to actually verify it in another person. It's kind of dreary work, right? So anyway, with that then, because the past and the future are illusory, not in a bad sense, not in a dismissive sense, but they are actually not there, right? We can choose to live there and play the game and things work out just fine, right? If you play the game well. In a similar sense, you could describe any game, not in a bad dismissive way, but let's say we were playing Monopoly, right? The money isn't real. The hotels aren't real. They're just little pieces of plastic. They're not actual hotels, right? But we can play and get really into it and like get heated and doing these side deals and everything else. That's why we play, because it's delightful. Just because it's illusory, right, doesn't mean it can't stoke your sense of fear, threat, and control. And just because the fear, threat, and control you feel maybe constrained by is unpleasurable, right, doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. In other words, if we're playing Monopoly and we're having a good time, oh, you're like you're crushing me. I'm like, can we just end the game? You're like, no, I want to play all the way till like you're actually bankrupt. And it's like, well, that's going to take another 2 hours, right? And the thing is, like, after a certain point, you can say, oh my gosh, it's like, you're my friend and I'm starting to sort of fray our friendship because we're playing this. Well, let's just stop the game. At any point, you can stop the game, pull yourself out of that illusion, right? And come back to the present moment. For about 5 nanoseconds for most of us, and then we start thinking about the larger game we're in, which is like, okay, so this was great, but now I have to drive home and pick up the kids or whatever, right? And we're back into the larger game of past, present, future. And my point is, that's okay. You choose to play Monopoly. You're choosing to sort of play this larger game. There's nothing wrong with that. However, when we talk about the sacred and profane, when we talk about fear, threat, and control being in the realm of the past and future, right? And the past and future being illusory, not in a shamey bad way, but just as a fact, they're illusory. And often we like illusion. We take in the illusion and it sort of gives us delight and pleasure, okay? The reality then is that the past and future are illusory, which means the realm of the profane is also illusory. Right? Because when you come back into the present moment, there is no time, there are no things, and the Tao Te Ching talk will explain this in more detail. I think I talked about this aspect. Anyway, someone will tell me and I can do another talk on it. There is no time and there are no things. And in this very real sense, then, the present moment is not only sacred, but the present moment is reality. Said another way, the present moment is the only thing that actually exists. Right? And the way you triangulate to know this is all of these things I've been saying, but just to name some of them. The present moment is the place where you can still find without the use of symbolic systems and language. So without the use of words, I can still present and find the present moment, right? So in order to give that to you without any symbol, I would just remain silent for 5 minutes, right? I would say the present moment is. This is the present moment. Now, I didn't have to say, I needed to say that so that you could sort of wrap your head around it and see that you are always in this present moment. And then to make the past, to make the future, I have to use words again and use all these pointings, right? Which then, without the pointings, cease to exist, right? And that is the litmus test. If you need to put a word on something to make it actually exist, it's an illusion. right? It's an illusion that we can all agree on, and like monopoly money. Not only is the monopoly money not real money because I can't go out and buy, a soda with it, right? But also, right, the monopoly money within here is binding, right? That $500 bill, when you're down to like nothing, and that is worth a lot to you. You will like scramble a lot. You will stress out a lot. And the point is, that's okay. You're choosing to do that. You're choosing to do that, right? But the insight is, if you will, if you're choosing to do that, presumably, if you know that you are the creator of this situation, you can choose to not do it as well, because you are a creator. You're not a slave. In the profane, it's perhaps advantageous for others to tell you you're a slave, but you are not actually a slave, right? The fact that you're even at the monopoly table means you're a creator, not a slave, because you have to choose to be there. So the present moment then is the only thing that actually exists, which means the sacred is the only thing that actually exists. The profane does not actually exist. It is an illusion, and that's okay. And we live in the illusion because it is delightful. I mean, at this meta level, right? It can be horrific, it can be scary, but it's just like going to the movie theater and paying, which I never understood, to watch a deathly scary movie with gore, with suspense, gives you nightmares. People come out, they're like crying, and I'm just standing there going like, you pay for that? Right? You're like crying, you're like throwing up, and you won't be able to sleep for a week. And it's like, and I'm like, and you pay for that. Okay, that's cool. That's cool. And the reality is you do pay for that. You do pay for that. So with this idea then, that the present moment is the only thing that actually exists. And so the sacred is the only thing that actually exists. Let me extend this even further and connect more dots. Your body, right, is of the sacred. Because your body exists only in the now, not last week and not next year. Your mind can jump to last week and next year. But your mind, sorry to break this to you, right, is also of your body. So your mind actually only exists in the now, although it can twist itself into things where it starts imagining the past and the future. Because your body exists only in the now, right, you can associate the body with the sacred. That's why doing a practice that gets you into your body or embodies, right, somehow magically, and this is why then, takes you out of the past, out of the future. When I'm back into my body, I'm not worrying about, paying my parking meter. If I need to pay my parking meter, I just do it. I don't even think, right? But I'm not worrying about it anymore. I'm not worrying about the past. And that's why things like yoga, where you like get into your body, or working out or going for a run, where it's like, oh, I go for a run, and when I hit mile 5, everything like disappears, because like you're like pounding, right? And you're running, and you're very much in your body, because there are concerns now that you need to sort of go around traffic and sort of make sure you hit your time and all this other stuff. So you're very in your body, and the past and the future just fall away. That's one of the reasons exercises and embodiment, exercises, yoga, are so quote unquote relaxing, because it pulls us by the hair out of the illusion pool of the past and the sacred. And then, after yoga, you get back in your car, and as you're driving, you start worrying about your meeting that is gonna, with the big client tomorrow, right? So you're back in the illusion of next week or tomorrow. And for me, that's okay. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But the whole point of teaching sacred and profane is not to say, oh, you better be sacred like 100% of the time. It's like, no, I'm teaching that there are two flavors and you can choose, right? If you're all profane and you're like, I'm miserable and I have no idea why, it's like this lens may give you the power to make your own sovereign decision as to how you would like to live your life differently. It's like, I don't know how I don't know what the salty sweet combination is blissful for you. I mean, you decide that, right? I'm just teaching you to like taste the different flavors. Similarly, if your body is of the sacred and the only thing that actually exists, because the sacred is the only thing that actually exists, you're like, well, that means the body is the only thing that actually exists. And it's like, yeah, it's true. It's consistent. So when you make these cross combinations, you're like, well, this implies that, but is it true that my body is the only thing that actually exists? And it's like, yeah. All right, sorry to break it to you, but yeah. Right, sort of intellectual people who are like, no, the body is just a vehicle for this thing called my consciousness. I'm like, well, if the body is just a vehicle, which is really insulting, by the way, if it's just a vehicle, then would you please produce the passenger for me? Where is this passenger? Right? And you're like, you cut the head open and it's like, it's here. It's like, it's the amygdala. It's the whatever. It's like, well, no, that's actually a part of the body. It's like you detach it and it just withers and dries up. So is there some other? And you're like, oh, the spirit and the soul. And it's like, oh, okay. So like this very empirically minded, concrete, just show me, I want the data, is now talking about spirit and soul. Like, to what extent will we pretzel twist ourselves, right, to stuff down and dismiss the body as just a vehicle, right? It's like you really can't have it both ways. It's like one or the other, just pick one. And it's like, no, my body is just a vehicle, and yet I want to be perfectly scientific and empirical. And there is this thing that is like the passenger of the body that I can't actually produce for you concretely, but I want to cling to the idea that I am scientific and empirical. And the body is just a vehicle to be used. I'm like, okay. That's a pretty crazy Monopoly game. I'm not sure I'm going to like, sort of ante up with you boys, but y'all have fun, like next round's on me, and I'll see you back in the office next week. Have fun. So let's keep going. So your body is sacred. Your body is the only thing that actually exists. Sorry to break it to you. And related to that, feeling is also sacred, because feeling is also only of the now, right? Feeling is now. How do you feel now? Right? How did you feel a year ago when this happened? You can go back to that, right? But when you relive that feeling, you're reliving it now. Right? You're not reliving the past feeling. That feeling is being reproduced in you now. And how you project into the future of how you will feel if something happens in the future, that clearly has not happened. It may never happen. But the feeling you have about it is not going to come to you next week. It is now. How will you feel next week if this thing actually happens? You don't actually know. You're like, oh, I think I'm going to like be horrified and just fall over, green and throwing up if my boss yells at me in this way. And then you actually get there, he or she yells at you, and you don't feel like that. You feel in a completely different way. Right? So you can't predict the future or the past of feeling. It's like, because feeling is only now. Thinking can be in the past or the future, because the thinking mind can jump back or ahead and threaten or fear from the past, threaten or fear about the future. So thinking tends to be more of the profane, because it can threaten and because it can go back and forth into the future, into these illusory realms that require words and symbolic systems to work. Feeling doesn't do any of that. Feeling is just here now. How do I feel now? That's it. That's how I feel. Now, I can threaten you. I can say, little boy, you better feel less scared before you get out on that soccer pitch, because, good boys, strong boys are not afraid when they're going out to meet their rivals and competitors, right? So I can threaten you over how you're feeling, but how you're feeling is still how you're feeling. It is what it is. And then, so I hope this is helpful, but I'm going to connect this idea of the present being sacred and the past and the future being more of profane and more fear, threat, and control. And connect this to a few other things I've talked about in other sessions of LSS, Live Sacred Space, okay? Um, when we talked about embodiment, right? When we come into our bodies, we feel less fear, threat, and control for some mysterious reason. And now we know why. Because the body is of the present moment. When you sink into the present moment, you sink into the sacred. So then that relates to what we have also said about tempo. When we said one of the ways to sort of drop back into your body is to slow down your tempo, right? Because no tempo, the present, is sacred, right? And when you have fast tempo, you're either running away from something you're afraid of in the past, or you're running towards something in the future, right? Like in The Great Gatsby, right? Fitzgerald's masterpiece, where you're like constantly reaching for the green light that's out of reach. You're not reaching at a slow tempo. You're always reaching at a fast tempo for something you desire because of something you fear that you're missing right now. So in order to come back more into the present, you slow down your tempo. You slow down your breathing. You slow down the pace at which you walk. You slow down the pace, certainly, at which you think. You don't slow down the pace at which you feel because you have no control over it. You feel however you feel, right? But it can be stoked by thought, so you slow down your thought. Everything else slows down as well. You can never really be no tempo because it's, things are always moving. At least it seems to us, right? So when you slow down tempo, you move more into the sacred. Okay. I guess that relates to one other thing I'll just leave here for future reference, which is because we are in the present moment, and in the present moment there is no past or future. Nothing actually moves. Nothing actually moves. There is no movement. There was this offhand comment by this Swami, kind of master of Kashmir Shaivism, and his name is Lakshmanji. I think he died in 95. But because he was of this sort of era, right? They could video him. So there's all this archive video of Lakshmanji, talking about the sutras, and he's so adorable. He's just the best. But in one of these videos, there were these sort of Western people that went over and sort of followed him and like recorded all this stuff. I'll never forget. I was watching years ago. Lakshmanji like explained this thing about something, and the questioner was asking him something, and he was just like looking, because he was like, he needs to look stuff up too because it's like so vast, he forgets. He's like, oh, it's this one, let me look it up. And he's looking it up, and the questioner is like, well, wait, but then given what you just said about time and the present moment or whatever, that would imply like this and this. And he just kind of looked up and was like, oh, yes, nothing moves. And then he continued looking. He was like, where was that thing? And I just started laughing out loud when I saw that. It was like, I thought that was just first rate. Where in a side comment, he just, by the way, it's like saying, by the way, your dad was actually so-and-so. And you're like, what excuse me, what? He's like, oh, yeah, obviously nothing moves. And that is what we're talking about here. In the Tao Te Ching talk, we talk about the fact that there is only one thing that actually exists. And if there's only one thing that actually exists, then nothing moves. Because to have movement, you require at least two things. Right? In order to see my hand moving, you need at least two things. You need my hand, and you need the background that is not my hand. So you can say my hand is moving. It always has to be relative to something else. Right? And at the ground of reality, as we've said in past sessions, there is only one thing that actually exists. Therefore, nothing moves. And for him to just toss that off, it's like, Thanks. Yeah, thanks for nothing. All right. So for movement, you require at least two things. There's only one thing, so nothing actually moves. So then, tempo. When you move fast, you're in the profane. Or rather rushing. When you're rushing, you're in the mode of the profane. Running from the past and fear, running to something in the future. So when you're in this mode of like, I'm always rushing around, I have no time, the reason you're rushing around and you have no time is because you're under a state of threat. Right? So one of the ways to sort of short circuit that is not to go into the past and try and disarm the threat, or not to go into the future and plan ahead and disarm that threat. That's at the level of monopoly. That's okay, you can do that. But if it's way too much and overwhelming for you, one of the core things you can do in the moment is to just slow down. I mean, that's why meditation, breathing things, you start, the guidance will often be like, just breathe more slowly. Like you can watch a guided meditation, right? And you like follow my breath and I'll like lead you into breathing more slowly. And then you'll calm down, you'll stop rushing, and you'll feel a lot better. Your head will clear into the sacred, and you'll be able to see all the threats, the entire lattice network. And then you'll be like, oh, well, all I have to do is like move this over here, and the meeting with the client next week will be fine. So you're more clear-headed and you have clearer vision, which you then proceed to use to win Monopoly. And that's okay. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You can go in, as a banker or hedge fund manager, meditate, get this huge insight. I've done it. I'm guilty as charged. You get this huge insight, you go in, and then you like crush the game, right? You do this trade, you take a position, and you do really, really well. You can use it like that. There's no right or wrong. Use it however you want to do. But that's why you slow down the breath, you slow down overall, you take a yoga class, and you're like, I was like magic. I have no idea. I have no idea why yoga works so well. I just know it works. I have no idea. I like start breathing more slowly and everything clarifies. This meditation thing really works. What is the medical? And then you start trying to control it again and predict it, right? But that is the fundamental reason. When you slow down, you drop more into your body and more tellingly into the present moment where there is no fear, threat, and control. Because in the present moment, there is no past and there is no future. So how can you threaten me if there is no future? Right? And then another thing we've said in the past, the mind is fast, the body is slow. So if you want to slow down into the present moment, go out and dig some weeds. Go for a walk. You go for a walk to clear your head. You take a shower to clear your head. You go for a run to clear your head. All these things you do in your body to slow down the sort of, monkey jumping around of your mind, from like mango to mango in the trees endlessly. Okay. So then, tying some more things together, the key to the present moment is to slow down. The key to embodiment also, voila, big surprise, right, is also to slow down, right? Why are all these things connected to slowing down? The physics of what I'm describing, of the sacred and profane, the sacred being in the present, the profane being in past and future, is why this is so, right? And in the West, we like turn to these sort of very Protestant ideas of like, well, slowing down, the reason that works is because going too fast is bad. Oh, we're just like a very not mindful, sort of society. All we care about is money and we're always rushing. So we need to not do that. And you better slow down or else. And that's why when you try to slow down with this, you better do this or else, because fast is bad and slow is good, then you're still under fear, threat, and control. Right? When you sit to meditate and you say, oh my gosh, even in my meditation, I can't get my mind under control. All right. Last week the meditation was so good, and now my meditation totally sucks. I'm like sucking even at meditation. I'm even incompetent at meditation, and I'm incompetent at balancing my checkbook. If I'm so incompetent, what will become of me? Future. Right? So even when you're meditating, you're not in the present moment. Not because you're incompetent, right? You're perfectly competent. You're not in the present moment because you're threatening yourself. Right? Meditation last week was great. And then I didn't sign up for more classes. I thought I could do it on my own. And now I'm screwing it up on my own. So now in the future, I won't be able to get that pleasure again. Fear, threat, control over a future that you can't put your finger on. When I ask you to show me next week when you're going to be this like, sorry dunderhead of a wreck because you didn't learn meditation well. Show it to me. And you're like, no, I can't. Like, if you can't show it to me, then it isn't here. Right? You're not a dunderhead. Right? You're just threatening yourself. Put down the stick and the past and future inexplicably, magically disappear. And all these things that are like good for us, the present moment, meditation, embodiment, all work because we slow down and we drop into the present moment. But that only works if you don't threaten yourself while you're doing it, because threatening is also pulling you out of the present moment. And it's not because it's like morally better to be in the sacred. It's simply because of the physics of sacred and profane in time. Right? Sacred and profane, like salty and sweet. Right? Salty is not superior to sweet. Sweet is not superior to salty. It's just two flavor profiles, and you blend them till you feel good. Right? Just like before, it's like if you use dropping into the sacred and dropping into the present moment to get these incredible downloads and insights on how to trade your positions for your clients as a hedge fund manager, right? So you use the sacred to go in and kick ass in the profane. That's okay. That's the salty sweet blend that works for you, right? Go have a ball, right? It's like there is a delight in perceiving salty and sweet, and a delight in being the chef, i.e. creator, of the flavors of your life. That is itself blissful and delightful. Because I'm talking about this, the only reason I'm telling you this is not because I want to liberate you and I want to be moral or whatever. It just so happens that out of my control, my delight, unfortunately, is not being a hedge fund manager or a high-tech CEO. My delight is to show people these flavors so that they can have more of their own delight. That's the thing that makes me delighted. And that's why I do this. That's why I do this. So all of this sounds very fancy, very spiritual, but it's very simple. The thing to do is slow down, however you resonate with slowing down. And while you're slowing down, don't threaten yourself over slowing down. Right? If you slow down poorly, in an unexpected way, it's unexpectedly more difficult to slow down now than it was last week. That's okay. Right? It's like, why am I telling you to not threaten yourself? Not because of self-compassion and like whatever. It's like, no, it's like the physics are, if you threaten yourself, then you're not going to drop in the present moment. And if what you want is to drop into the present moment for all these reasons, then one of the sort of just physics of the thing, right? It's not me doing this. I'm just like, I mean, if you want the ice cream to stay cold and solid, don't put it in the oven. Right? You're not an idiot if you put it in the oven, but if you want, liquid ice cream, then do that. If you want a different result, then do this. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just like, what do you actually want? What kind of flavor profile delights you? And then I'm like, well, you're the physics of salty and sweet, and you make up your own mind. Right? So it's not moral, it's not right or wrong, it's not superior or inferior. It's just what delights you and how do we get there? That's how I think about it. Okay, what else? So in meditation, similarly, there's all these different methods, but it's to get you to the same place. It's to get you to just like effing sit there and not think about the past or the future. Right? That's why the Zenists will call it only just sitting, or which itself becomes this like very too fancy term. But the reason they go through all these pretzel gyrations to like get you to just sit is because it's so hard. It's so shocking to ask you to just sit there, right? It's like shocking. It's like if Monopoly is upsetting you, then walk into the kitchen. Well, when I walk into the kitchen, I'm going to miss my turn. And it's like, I mean, just sit in the kitchen and away from the Monopoly table. And it's shocking because your whole world, 99% of your reality has been this Monopoly game. And the only reason I'm coaching you on sitting is because it's starting to upset you, right? Other people who are like, no, I'm living large, right? I don't need to meditate. And I'm like, that's okay. You know, we're here if you need us later. So then, fear, threat, and control are an illusion. And to make another connection here, going back to like nature of reality, time then, past, present, future, the arrow archetype of time is also an illusion, right? And that's okay. But to square this with some other reference points, I'll just start with physics, quantum physics, and I'll just spend like 10 seconds on this, but just to enter this into like the official record. And those of you who like that can run with this. So in quantum physics, one of the biggest questions is like, at the quantum level, physics changed, and at the classical gross sort of level. And one of the toughest challenges was to sort of square and unify, right, quantum theory and the equations of quantum theory with relativity. And about, I think, 40, 50 years ago, these two physicists came up with an equation, Wheeler and DeWitt came up with an equation that actually unifies relativity and quantum mechanics. So this is called the Wheeler-DeWitt equation. And the only thing I'll say about this is that they finally found a way to sort of combine and make consistent relativity and quantum mechanics. So the gross and the sort of quantum level, where the physics seemingly completely change. But in order to make the equation work, when you do the equation and do all the sort of, you know, for us sort of elementary people, we would say like rounding and canceling out of numerator and numerator and denominator. It's not actually like that. But when you run the equation, time falls out of it. Right? Time, like you end up at the final step, metaphorically speaking, canceling time from the numerator and canceling time from the denominator. And you have this result that unites everything consistently, but time is not a factor, right? And this is why the theoretical folks are like, well, I mean, if that's what the equation says, that's what the equation says. Math is just math is describing things at a level that our senses, you know, may be at odds with, right? But we know the math works. But to everyone else, it's like, this is stupid. This is ridiculous, right? Because if time doesn't exist, that doesn't fit with our everyday experience. Oh, and also, by the way, it's useless, because if this equation implies time doesn't exist, then I can't use it to like, well, maybe I could, but I can't use it to build bombs or control the future or whatever. But to everything we've been saying, right, this outcome of the Wheeler-DeWitt equation makes perfect sense. Because to us, time is an illusion. Not a bad illusion, it's just an illusion. And it is perfectly consistent with everything we say about the sacred and profane, because the universe is, of course, in the present moment. Right? There is no future. There is no past. There is only now. And another way to say that is that all of reality, being the one thing, is sacred and not profane. Right? You can't have movement without at least two things, the hand and the background. You can't have fear, threat, and control without at least two things, right? if I'm going to slap myself on the hand, there has to be at least two things. There has to be the hand, right, the slapping hand, and the very, very, very naughty other hand that morally is corrupt and needs to be slapped. There need to be at least two things. In reality, from the Tao Te Ching talk, there is only one thing that actually exists. So if there's only one thing, nothing moves, and also, by extension, nothing threatens. Nothing threatens. And in perfectly consistent with Taoist worldview, right? Nothing controls. The thing just grows as it does. Nothing controls. So a couple of other sort of corollaries. As a result of this, all of reality is sacred, not profane. The universe is sacred. Existence is sacred. Time is not an arrow. It's more of a circle, but in reality, time does not actually exist. Right, and this is consistent with Wheeler DeWitt. So in the Tao Te Ching talk, we said there is only one thing that actually exists. We crossed it with Taoism and Hinduism in that talk. So then you can say, well, let's get back to time for a moment, since this presumably is a talk about time. What is time then? So to me, time is an archetype built on two things, right? So if you have this sort of Lego box of reality and the physics that we are somewhat familiar with, if we are going to make this archetype called time, we actually need two things. So the one thing that actually exists, where there is no time, there are no things. There is no past, there is no future. There is only sacred, there is no profane. This one thing that actually exists. We need to do two things to this one thing in order for this phenomenon of time to fall out and be experienced by us. The first thing we have to do is we have to, as we've said before, cut the one thing into more than one thing, right? Because if we're going to talk about fear, threat, and control, past, present, future, if there's only one thing, there's no time, so we're done. So in order to create time out of like whole cloth, the first thing we need to do is we need to cut the cloth. And we cut the cloth by naming. This is straight out of the Tao Te Ching talk. The way we cut the one thing into 10,000 things, Wan Wu in Taoist thinking, or we cut the, in Hindu thought, the one appears as many, right? The one thing appears as nama rupa, right? All the things, all the nama rupa is like the equivalent of Wan Wu in Taoist thought. And nama, of course, nama is name, rupa is form. So all things is name, form. Form that is cut off by naming it. In the classic example, in order for me to cut this off from reality, I have to name the form, right? So if I say, hand me the thing, you're like, well, what thing? Hand me the pencil, then I know to hand you this. Without the name, this is indistinguishable from the one. And actually, with the name, if you're looking at it from a certain lens, it's undistinguishable from the one. But in the Monopoly game, when we say pencil, we mean just this and not this, not this, not this, right? So that's the first thing you need. You need to name things, and with time, we name things through counting. So we say 1, 2, 3, 4, January, February, March, April. Okay. So that's the first thing we need for time, the cutting and naming of the one thing. And then the second thing is we need movement. We need movement. So we cut the one thing into January, February, March, April, and then we need to move. There needs to be this little calendar marker ball that goes from January to February to March to April. Okay. And with those two things together, you have time. So what is time? So movement, right, and counting. Okay. So what is movement and counting? Movement, counting, movement. 1, 2, 3, January, February, March, April. It is tempo. And there we have time. Okay. So I'm not trying to be fancy. I'm just stating a fair, right? I'm not saying this is not some fancy religious or spiritual framework. I'm just describing a state of affairs that is so in the most common sense language. So we have taken reality, the one thing, and we have cut it two ways, right? It's like in those fancy Chinese restaurants where you have like lobster two ways. Of course, I have to bring food into it, right? You have the lobster sauteed in like ginger and scallion, and then you have lobster porridge or soup. They take the one lobster, exorbitantly expensive, but they make it two ways. So you take the reality and you have it two ways. You count, you cut and name, and you move so that you have the background and the foreground and you move, right? So you have counting and movement together, which to me means that you take this one thing and you cut it in two ways and you combine the two cuts. Said another way, you square it. So you have two dualities, cutting, naming, and movement, and you square them. So time is duality squared, which is a profound level of illusion. Right? You take the illusion of duality, the one thing is actually two things, in two dimensions, and 2 times 2 you square it, and then you have something like time. Right? So like you're taking the one thing and folding it in on itself twice, like origami, naming and movement. But then you have this thing that seems real, that is time, but when you unfold it again, you see the one thing whole and uncut. So when you go down to the core level of reality, whole and uncut, unfolded, time disappears because the core of reality is non-dual. There's only one thing that actually exists. There's only one thing. There is no second thing. Which itself, I mean, we're just using words to describe all this. So it's like very funny and adorable because even non-dual is dual because it implies dual as its counterpart. The real way to express the oneness of everything is just to not say anything. You don't use words, right? That's why the correct answer to a koan is often just silence or movement with your body in the now. Right? In the Rinzai school, that's why it's like getting hit on the head is like, will sometimes, enlighten the student or the target because it brings them into their body in a very specific way that they've led up to. And then they're enlightened, and then they still have to go do the dishes and clean the bathroom, right? So when you go down to the core of reality in physics, a la Wheeler DeWitt, time disappears. Makes perfect sense. When you go down to the core of reality in the Tao Te Ching, or in the Hindu scripture, right, the Upanishads that we read during that talk, time disappears. And when you sit in meditation, you slow tempo down, and embody into the present moment, time disappears. Making another connection in the talk on the sacred and profane in art, where we talked about Joycean aesthetic arrest as a form of sacred, right? When you are in Joycean aesthetic arrest, time disappears. You're looking at the Van Gogh, you're crying, you don't know what day it is, you don't know your name. You're in Joycean aesthetic arrest, time disappears. And all of these are all then consistently sacred, right? Realms devoid of fear, threat, and control. Those of you who have done meditation stuff with me, I think I've probably talked about it in the series. It's been like 48 weeks, so I'm losing track of what I've covered in the series or not. But one of the meditation-ish exercises we'll do is called Two Birds, right? It's the Upanishadic meditation from the Hindu tradition. I think that I've taught in the series, but anyway, just for the record, right, to tie it all together, the universe, all of reality, is the second bird, right? So the one thing watches and does not eat, does not discern, there is no fear, threat, or control, okay? And so this second bird that's described second in sequence is the one thing. And the first bird moves, eats, says, this is a sweet fruit, this is a sour fruit. The first bird is the one that cuts, right, reality into many pieces. The first bird then in this analog is time. The first bird that cuts and then flits from branch to branch is time, is your mind, is the past and the present, right? Is fear, threat, and control. The first bird, in other words, is an illusion. The first bird is itself a wave on the ocean of the second bird. So that the second bird is the only thing that actually exists. There is no time with the second bird, only with the first bird. The first bird is illusory, and not in a bad way, but it is not the full real thing. Right? Just like time is illusory, but not in a bad way. It's like, hey, you know, like if I have a payment or a contractual obligation coming up, I'm still going to hustle to like fulfill it because I don't want to be threatened, right? But it is illusory, and that's okay. The money at the Monopoly table is illusory, and that's okay. I still play. I'm still hustling to like beat you and bankrupt you when we're playing Monopoly, even though all of this is fake. And it would be terribly unsporting of me if I were to push back from the table and say, look, fellas, this isn't real money. That isn't a real hotel. And they're just looking at me like I have 6 heads going like, you know, why are you doing this? Right? You can say all this is an illusion, but it's like, you're here. You chose to be here. Right? And the kind of person who does that is either a mystic and a messiah or just a jerk. Right? You're spoiling the fun for everyone. Right? It's like when you say, you guys, this is just a movie. Don't be scared. They're like, sit down, you jerk, right? We paid for the movie. Like, if you're scared, go outside and like, you know, go to the bathroom. And so those are some connections here. And then also to touch on something I said in last week's exercise, actually, where I was kind of, you know, needling you and giving you a hard time. When I said that when you say you have no time, right, that itself was a particularly sort of, that also counted as a movement of stuffing something down within you, right? When you say I have no time, that is a motion of stuffing down. And the reason for that is you are taking a thing that is intrinsically profane, time, and then adding fear and scarcity to it. So time itself is already profane. And then you square it yet again. You cube time. So it's already movement and naming. And then you square it again and add scarcity to it. I have no time. Ha ha. And when you have this cubed version of time, right, it's already named and it's already counting, and you add fear and scarcity, right? It is particularly poison, pernicious kind of thing, depending on how you use it. And when you take it and use it to stuff down this part of you that is this like vulnerable, valid part of you that loves you and is trying to protect you, right? When we talk about in healing, the lost board member, when you use that to stuff it down, it is a particularly violent motion of stuffing something down. Right? I mean, just ask any child, right? When the parent says, I have no time to be with you, right? It's not that, oh, I have to go save your sister. Come save your sister with me. And it's like, that's still quality time, right? But when you have, I just have not enough of this already profane thing to spend time with you, right? That's particularly hurtful. Okay. So just to combine that with something we said last week, not to wag my finger at you even more, but just to, you know, not to make you feel, but just to touch the jugular of the entire state of affairs when we do that. And then you can do with it what you will, right? You can do with it what you will. Okay. So how are we doing on time? So I should get to the exercise. But before I do the exercise, there's just one more, from my notes, one more extra credit thing to sit with. Only if you want. Only if you want. And it is to ask yourself, because there's all these different directions I can go with this, right? But a bit of extra credit is to sit and ask yourself how all of this we've been talking about relates to embodiment, and we've touched on some of that already. But also then, as an extra credit, how all of this we're saying about time relates to grief, how it relates to grief. So what is the relationship between time, the way we've described it, and embodiment and grief? And embodiment and grief are two topics we've spent a lot of time in this series. So if you go back and think about what we've said about embodiment and grief and pair that with time, what are the connections? That I think would be, again, no pressure, only if you want, a very fruitful and interesting, very fertile kind of line of inquiry. Yeah. Okay, so those are all the notes I had for the talk. And before I close the session, I will give you a little sort of exercise related to all this. Something to sit with. And again, for those of you who are new to live group advising, live sacred space, the way we do these exercises is that we follow the fourth principle of proceeding sacred space, which is there's no expectation of participation. So I suggest this exercise as kind of a fun, nerdy thing to do, but only if you want, only if you want. And the way you would do this exercise is you would find some quiet time, 5 or 10 minutes this week between now and next session, either in your home or if your home has too much activity going on. Let's say you're driving in your car to get like groceries. And when you park in the parking lot, before you go in, you just sit an extra 5 or 10 minutes in the car doing an exercise like this. No one will miss you, but do it with pen and paper. Do it with pen and paper. And the exercise for this week is just an idea of something to sit with. Slowly in your body, in the present moment, which sums up all of this fancy talk in a hopefully more firsthand and visceral feeling for you to experience directly in the now. Okay. It may feel theoretical. It's the kind of thing where if you get it, you will get it in your body and not intellectually. You will feel the change in how you feel and how you even see things, even through the physical images to your eyes of the things you see around you. Like, so in other words, the things you look at won't change, right? You won't go into this hallucination, but you will be looking at everything around you through a different kind of lens, and you will see things, again, not physical things, but the quality of your perception will change. Okay. And also, if it doesn't make sense, don't worry. It will be here in the replay for you to come back to in the future if you ever feel so moved. And the exercise is simply this. It's to take a little time to reflect on this thing I will say to you now as a kind of pointing. Okay. And the thing I would like to say to you is that all things end except for one. Realize this one, and you will become free. That's it. I'll give it again. All things end except for one. Realize this one, and you will become free. Only if you want. Only if you want. So that's it. And the exercise is just to sit with that, reflect on that, and to just see what you can see what happens. Everywhere you look, you are perceiving this one thing that does not end. It is not separate from anything you can see. It is not separate from anything you can feel and touch or hear. Everything you see, everything you feel and touch, everything you hear, everything you smell and taste, every thought you think is perceiving also along with it this one thing that does not end, directly and with no veil and no distortion. You are perceiving it right now in its pure form. Okay. All right. I think that's enough for today. And with that exercise given, I will go ahead and close the session. So our next session is next Sunday, same time, same place. I will leave the link here in the comments for you all to sign up for now if you'd like. It's free, open to the public. Share the link with friends only if you want. And I hope to see you there. And for now, I will hereby close the session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me, and thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment, and the spiritual nourishment of this shared sacred space with me. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great day, have a great week, and I will see you all in the next session. Thank you. Thank you.